So now that I have my environment roughly staged, I have my rough lights in, it looks a lot better than the default lighting and the default staging and just the vacuum of space. I didn't spend too much time on it, but there was a pretty huge payoff. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to start to think about the animation path, and so I'm going to grab the ball and I'm going to move it back to roughly where I want the animation to start, and I'll start with about the height that I want the ball to start bouncing. So I'm going to basically follow the exact same start of the animation. The ball for now is going to start in an upper position, drop down to the ground and bounce a few times across the floor. Now, I did mention in a previous presentation that I can get away with, I believe I can get away with doing this with fewer keyframes, and what I mean by that is that currently I'm at 90 frames and I'm going to live with that for now, and I'll add more frames as needed. But I'm going to have this impact the ground maybe 4 times, and I think what I can do is mark the first keyframe. So I have the ball in the position where it's starting to fall to the ground. The playhead's at the beginning of time, and so I'll mark that first keyframe. I'm going to advance the playhead, and I'm going to forget about maybe I'll just every 20 frames I'll have this ball drop and impact with the ground. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this down. Okay, and I'm just kind of looking to see where that starts to touch the floor. And in fact, what I'll do is I want the Y value when the ball hits the ground to be the exact same every time, right? Because the floor is not going to change, and so if this is bouncing 3 or 4 times, I want to make sure that that value is exactly the same. And so I'm just going to zero out the Y value, okay? And I'll mark that keyframe. Now, when I scrub the playhead back and forth, I didn't advance it along the X-axis at all, so let me do that now. So I'm making sure that my playhead is right over top of the keyframe that I just created. I'll advance the playhead, and I'm not too concerned about what the value of that is, but I'll mark the keyframe. Now what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to advance the playhead about 20 frames. I'm going to advance the ball along the ground, and I'll update the keyframe. I'm going to advance the playhead again 20 frames, advance the ball across the ground, and mark the keyframe. And maybe you're thinking, well, wait a second, I thought we were going to make this ball bounce. Well, we are going to make it bounce, but I'm just marking all of the bottom keyframes. Now one strategy would be to go about halfway through here, lift the ball up, mark the keyframe, and now I'm starting to define that path. But as I mentioned before, I think I can get away with actually making this ball bounce based on just these keyframes. And the reason I think I can do that is if I go into the window and I go into timeline and I focus on the ball, the position of Y, and I'll just maximize this. If I go in and I select these points, I'm not even at this point, soon I'll pay attention to what's going on actually in my scene, but I know that this Y curve could correspond with my bouncing ball path. I'm going to hold down the shift key and I'm going to break these tangents. Okay, and I'm just really looking at this path as the path that the bouncing ball is taking. I'm holding down the shift key and I'm breaking that tangent, and I'm really just, again, looking at that path. Break this tangent, and I'm just really kind of, treating this almost like a drawing the animation path. There's fewer variables this way to deal with, fewer keyframes, and I should be able to get away with this pretty successfully. So I do want to make sure that there's a little bit of a decay, so that the first bounce is bigger than the second bounce is bigger than the third bounce, and so on. So just kind of playing with these values here, and I can always go back and also adjust what's going on along the X-axis, but without even looking at the environment, without even looking at the ball, I think that that'll get me pretty close to what I want. And I can always go back in and kind of play with some of these values. So I got kind of a little craziness going on towards the end, and there's a couple of different things that I can do, but I think that that's looking pretty good. What I'm going to do now is I'll look at this through a flat side view. So I'm going to split my viewport. I'm going to look at this through the front viewport. I'll pull out just a little bit, recompose my shot, and again, I like to look at this with constant shading lines. I'll get a better sense of where the ground plane is here, I think, and I'll just scrub my playhead through time. Okay, it looks like my sphere is lining up nicely with the bottom of my seamless here. So I'm not going to change the height of anything here, but I am going to try to, really take advantage of what's going on here with some of these keyframes. And so I could tuck these a little closer together just by clicking and dragging them back. And that last curve gets a little strange, and so I'll jump into the animation view, and that'll allow me to kind of focus on this last curve and see if I could get some different results with that. So I'm going to take a look and see what the two curves are doing here, the two handles, and I'll just kind of yank on one of those and see if we can. That's a little bit closer to what I want. Okay, it gets a little strange here because I'm actually exaggerating this. It's really kind of flattening that out, but I actually think that's going to be okay. I'm not too worried about that because when I rewind and play this, okay, it does get a little strange here. This curve I think is a little too flat here, and so I'll just kind of pull that back this way. I'll pull this back that way. And now I'm looking here to see what's happening with the arc, and I can also just kind of play back and forth. That's a little bit closer to what I want. And again, there's going to be, a lot of back and forth here with this sort of thing. So I can just keep playing. Once I get a strategy of how to deal with these curves, what I'm doing is I'm shortening the curve, but I'm pulling them back tighter so that there's more of a transition here, rather than using these really long tangent handles. There we go. That looks pretty good. I like that path. I do want to raise up the Y value, and I could just grab it here and say, put that there, or I could have just done that directly in the F curve. So you can see there's a lot of play back and forth between these things. I like where my path is for my bouncing ball at this point. I may want to kind of redistribute this a little bit. But again, I could probably tweak this for hours. But I'm pretty happy with that. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in and throw in my squash and stretch. I don't need to be in the animation view to do that. I'll do that as quickly as possible, but I will do that in the next presentation.